So we're starting with a mild inversion. It has the energetics of kind of feeling that whole front body loosen up and kind of cooling for the body. So it's a good summer practice. I think this would be considered a good summer routine. So you're going to sit on your bolster center mat. You have a rolled up blanket at the foot, and the belt is looped around your legs, and I want this belt to be kind of grippy. So it's not necessarily going to completely tug on the legs, but when you lower onto your back, you'll have just your brain on the blanket. And as you decide how far forward you kind of picture the tailbone on the bolster, I would be pretty far forward. You almost feel like your rear is kind of moving onto the other side. But when you lower down, you can kind of feel this tilt. Keep the knees bent for a while so that we can get the flesh in the back to actually soften. So I find that a bridge pose, when I'm getting my bones set up for it, like this version, a little more longer lift, so it attains the goal of that pelvic, the hip flexors lengthening. So when I have this lift, I want you to walk your feet wide so that you still need this belt fairly loose, right? And then make sure the belt is high up, and then tighten it down. So make sure it feels like its sensation is around the legs. You can feel that just below the buttocks. And as the feet push into the ground space, you want to get a feeling that your front thigh bones are toned, and there's a little grip in really it's an interesting glute pull, because you don't have to use your muscles to lift your hips up. The bolster does the work, but you can engage the thighs, okay? So take a sandbag, add to the engagement of strength, right? But this will soften it up. And then you'll put that sand right about where the belt is, and then stretch both of the legs down onto the blanket. So when my thighs are reaching, I have kind of welcomed the stretch in my back muscles, the strengthening stretch, the back bend, but I'm far enough forward on my bolster that it's not kind of crunching in my back. So you've got to kind of play with your attempt at balancing on this bolster. So it's like you kind of poke your spine at that ridge, and then it helps elongate you. So it's kind of a nice connection of your props. Flow the arms out and distant. And then as you experiment with the sensations of support with the props, which means also the blanket at the base, feel if your feet are anchored on top and they're elevated so the heels are gently floating. And for some of us, the feet might kind of point down, flex a little bit, turn out. Sort out the movements of your legs at your feet. Since the leg parts of the top are fairly fixated, your feet have ankles that can turn them any of those directions. And so you might sort out if there's a direction that's suitable for your legs to release. And that could be they turn out with this one. So relax your eyes so you have those eye pillows already along for the beginning of practice, closing your eyes. Built-in eye pillows, eyelids. And as diaphragm is descending down, the abdomen expands. And as you exhale, the diaphragm ascends, and the diaphragm, as it ascends, the abdomen relaxes. We're working our experience to arrive at a moment where you feel both those movements are relaxing with the in and the out breath. So Experiment with your in and out breath, arriving and settling, movements of the breath, sensations of the movement of breath. 4 intercostals. Now feel the arm's distance from your center line, and see if you can let the arms lower down a little bit, but still a distance, but they're lower than the heart. So one idea is, as far as our heart rate, you know, the higher the arms go, it's going to pick that up no matter what we're up to, even if we're sitting or lying or anything. So the science of it all is fairly obvious once you calculate the risk of moving the limbs, or however you move, it's going to change the effect on the heart and the blood pressure. So we're going to be switching the leg pattern so it does lower that blood pressure and calm the nervous system. So we'll start with those arms that are a little lower than the heart. And then if your feet can just circle for a few moments, circling out and circling in. So both directions of feeling through your feet, your ankles. It'd be nice to kind of flush the legs out. And then once you find that still point, we'll remove the sand momentarily for transition. And when you move your legs back to that bending position, notice if you were getting relatively comfortable on your back with the legs straight. And now it's almost as if we know this is easier on our back, but it's an adjustment period. So I'm going to encourage you to push into your feet and lift your hips up again. So you start to isolate those muscle patterns in the legs. If you want to scoot your bolster down a tiny bit so you feel like it's really supporting you, I don't know exactly where your bolster is in relationship to your hips at the moment, but you want to feel that when you lower down your tailbone completely this next moment, and you bring your hands to your bolster to help you adjust to get one knee at a time in towards your center. And then we'll take the belt and slide it to the knees and then loosen it, or towards the knees, and loosen it up. Okay, we're going to track this first today, this wide angle. And reason being, right, it's about the inverted quality of the limbs as well. And then we'll get right into the heart and the lungs. So we'll start, I'm not making this loose, but we'll see how it goes. I want to get a pretty good circulation. So you're going to get the belt around your feet. Give yourself at least 5 tries. And then as the belt is holding the legs, right? So it's holding your feet, right? Or your feet are holding the belt is probably the truth. But when I work with this reverse flow through the legs, and we're working towards the experience of maybe circulation in the legs, but also a stillness in this organ space in the belly zone and the abdominal organs, but also in the kidneys, right at the back. So if you feel there's a grippiness in those kids back there, you might let the legs kind of rock a little side to side. They can bend, whatever it feels like. You can loosen up that back layer. And then once you find some balance with the feet, moving both equally away, maybe relax your vision about how they should look and experiment with just them motioning open and then still point. So sensation might be the most important part here versus, say, visualization, because that's important too, but looking in So my knees can feel a little bit of a shaky zone, maybe not the flexibility, but just finding where they're going to experience a support. So this is an important pose for knee care in this cycle of poses. So it cools you off, but you also feel the opportunity for the circulation around the knees to go the other direction. Gravity's downward pull. So I want you to bend through the left knee, kind of like you're making some sort of a wild looking angle. But you're going to take that belt on that left leg and bring it around so it slides to the space around the knee or just above the knee on that left leg. So it's wrapped around. You still have the big loop. It didn't change. You still have this big loop around that right foot. And then now instead of the left foot, it's around the bent left leg. So it could actually be below the knee. This actually feels pretty good too. Yeah. I'm certainly used to it above the knee. But in this angle, the one thing you might emphasize is letting it be just straight up from the hip line, which is hard to find out when you're upside down. If you're in line. So feel a little bit of that core circulation in that abdominal muscles to get there. Right, so my legs are not flinging back. They're right into the center and out. And then let your right foot flex a bit. So get that belt around that foot so you can get a feeling of pushing out into the bones of the foot, not just the heel. And then if the arms can be straight back or open to the side. Again, we're working with cooling into the body, relaxing in the kidneys, softening. If it's too much stretch, you can always make the belt loop a little smaller of a loop. And that actually feels pretty good on my back. So these are nice kind of supports. They're all therapeutic shapes that we're recognizing in our practice. So let your eyes perhaps close for some moments to receive this side. It takes a little more setup just to get the first side going. It's completely confusing. You can unmute yourself and get some answers. Looks like those I can see. Yep. Yeah, now this left leg, I don't know if somebody has their foot on the ground. Looks like perhaps. You want to have that foot off the floor. Yes, there we go. Okay. It's good for me to check. Okay. Yeah, I haven't seen it with the foot down. I'm just saying that it's incorrect. I just haven't seen that before. Does that feel a little better with the foot up? Okay. All right. So, and that's easier on the back, right? So if my back flesh from that looping down from the left leg to the back, all the way reaching out to the right leg can be kind of in this basin. It's kind of a scooped basin. Okay. Now, when you switch sides, have a little fun with the switch over because it can be fun or it can be a frustrating experience. So you're gonna let the hands hold the belt, and then I do it different every time now, I have to admit. Then you're gonna try to get that left foot into the belt and then switch the side. Now, if that doesn't work, how else could you do that switch over? Well, you could really pull the belt in, but you've got to get the legs back into the experience instead of pulling the belt all the way to you. Otherwise, you'll kind of lose the whole tensegrity of the experience. So get a feeling of the bending opposite leg. That doesn't feel quite the same as the pose. Second side. So, it could be a hold up in a hip hold up. Okay. You might need the belt a little bit longer on the second side because your range of motion. You likely will kind of push your foot down different on the second side, right? So you got to stay angled. So it's out from the middle, outwards versus down, right? And that right foot is off the floor, second side. It's tempting to see what it's like when it's down. Yeah, I think the reasoning behind that, well, I've never seen it like that, but would be why it would kind of grip the hip flexor a bit if I push the foot down, try to keep my left foot out. So no sand is needed on this one, but play with the experience of the arms distanced again, and the right knee moves open. So what leg is going to create that balance is likely very equal, right? They're equally active at letting go. So you need to move the belt around the bent leg and kind of see if you change it. Does it help you with letting go in the upper leg? That's the connector. That's likely getting some of the vibe of this position, some circulation intensity. Now, the circulation in the inner thighs and lymph drain is the larger part of this. So what we'll do is feel the movement of that right knee just out. You're not trying to do any excessive rotation of the knee turning outwards. But now you're going to get a hold of your belt, and I want you to slide it off your right foot. Bring your right foot down below you, down towards the blanket. And as I stretch the right leg, I'm going to cross the left leg straight over. Straight over is the key, to the right side. Hold the belt with just your right hand. And as the leg is motioning to the right, see if you can push into the belt with your foot. And notice if going downstream is helpful in your hip, or if going straight across is beneficial. And beneficial would be that you're feeling a little more full leg versus just the hip. So it feels like it streams through a few more places than just the top attachment. Then you're in a good situation for releasing tension. Okay, it's like you've got to find tension to release tension. Or you have retention. Okay, so loosening up the stagnation, you might put a hand to the left side of the waist and explore the breath in that space. You might put a hand to the hip and encourage that hip to stretch over towards the left leg or downwards. Okay. A few moments here. Left arm could also be elevated. Head can turn to the left, relax the neck. Now let's try to keep the left leg straight. So when we move the leg up, if it's having a little bit of a bent challenge, kind of pull it like your right hand is holding the leash. Steer it this way to the center and up. And then swap the foot in the belt. Move the right foot up, take the left foot out, keep it in that straight modality as much as you can. If you need to bend your left knee, put the foot on the floor on the way downwards, that's okay. And then swap the hand holding the belt. So these little parts of organizing are important. So when I cross the right leg to the left, I'm going to feel how my hand is holding onto the belt, how that cross diagonal motion is working into my left bicep. So I want to get still some arm support. I'm not tugging in my neck. And this blanket works out pretty good for me so far. You could have it across your mat, like I mentioned, for those that in the beginning when we were setting up. So if you decide you want to turn the blanket the other way, that's okay. Find some options so that the arms are more on the floor, not on the blanket. So I cross over, I could improve on getting the leg a little higher to the left. but you know, kind of feel what you sacrifice if you yank on your leg. So maybe it's not quite ready to get that far into the stretch. If it's starting to yank and have some measurable discomfort, right? Where you mentally are driven to try to let go of the pressure. So feel where the leg is easing and you're finding some continuous experience of the hip. There's no problem with feeling that. Now that we've kind of worked our way into, you could say, loading the circulation through the legs, right? We started with front zone, then we kind of drained through the lymph pipe, right, through the inner leg. And now the outer hip, this isn't the lymphy area, right? So you feel muscles. So we're going to load it for bone density next, so, and cooling. So get a feel when that leg is crossing to the left, and then when it's bending a little bit this time to come out. So we're going to bend that right knee and then draw the leg back to center, bring the left knee up, take the belt off. I think we'll go beltless on this one today. And so you might adjust, and what I'm going to recommend so your back can kind of have a flush will be some knees side to side. It doesn't have to be especially dainty or, you know, not too wild and crazy. It could be where you really want some pace of movement, create a little fan movement. You might have slow, kind of cranky moving through the hips. But we're going to reflect on this in a few moments again with sand on them. So I want you to get some movement. And then we'll take it into legs up, sandy feet. Okay, so get a sand bag and layer that sand so it goes from your feet up, right? So you're going to go straight up when you're ready. So take your time. And when the knees are pointing up, they kind of poke straight up out of the floor. Then you're going to lay them back into your center. And then as you scoop up, I think all these things are important. I have a little space at my feet. And I want to have enough space that my knees don't move in together, right? So I don't have this knock knee experience. It's like 50-50 with people, though. You know, in a group, you can always find there's the knees in and the knees out. It's just two different types of knee patterns. So, but the knees in is going to be a little tough on my inner knee. So I want to make sure that I have some space. So you might touch your kneecaps if you're doing a little sensitivity test, right? Where if you think the bullseye is right in that center spot. And then you want to be sure that that area is not pointing inwards. And then the feet might feel like the heels push out when you do that, just to maintain that. And then as the feet are flexing, then move into that awareness. Hands could go away from the knees. And I would take the arms, if possible, in cactus, so that you can work on the movement of the intercostals. The intercostals in motion. The belly movement is pretty obvious when you're breathing and pulsing the breath. But the area that I'm finding is really interesting for my neck muscles is to work with the intercostals motion. So expanding the rib cage and then letting it settle so that there's this energetic intrigue with the breathing, with belly focus and intercostal. So it's a little bit of a conundrum I'm finding. To find the right balance for connecting to the lung force and the diaphragmatic strengthening. So breathing can be really technical, and it can also just be, it's a survival. So you're going to automatically be operating that way. It's on auto drive. So with that movement of the core body. Find stillness in the structural places, the legs, most importantly. Hips, weight bearing with the sand on the feet. And then that flexibility in the spine from being in this interesting blend of a back bend, but I sometimes feel that it has a forward bend feeling in my legs. So the feet flex. The hips weight down. It's a little bit longer, a waiting game to load the pose. Let the eyes rest back. And enjoy the pose. There's some parts to feel. It's part of it loading it, and then we move out. Sometimes that's when that sensation of change in your breathing muscles arrives, but for the moment. Okay, now with the legs in this type of reach, now maintain what the legs have done for the hips and bending through. Move the sand to your hands, and then you're going to move your knees over towards the right, and then put the sand on the outer left leg. It could be hip closer, could be knee. It could be closer to knee or hip. But my knees go right, and there's a block there besides the bolster. So that makes it a little more height. The tendency might be that your right knee kind of pulls up. So I want you to do what you feel naturally you need to do to feel comfortable. So if your body has a kind of a jerk reaction, maybe it's necessary to have the knee a little higher the right leg. But get a feel for that weight. This is, I think, important. To have some sort of weight. Maybe for some of you that it feels like it's all a lot of stretch, middle of the leg would be better. If you want to go a little deeper in the pose, you go farther to the knee. But it is a pull for me. I mean, maybe you don't feel any stretch, but it's a little bit of a tug in the intercostals now that we started there. And then we're kind of looping around to the hip. And then I'm going to cross into the IT band. This is good stuff to work on, right? IT band, lateral rotators. Okay. Now the final awareness here for the hip might be for you to just let the body respond and then ease a little more traction, which is not going to be pushing props around, but just kind of feeling how your pelvis responds. So it might hold back. That might be best versus kind of leaning the thigh a little away from you. Find the important spot of centering. It starts to move into the SI joint when it gets pulled too tight. So just be sure that you feel like there's an impact, stretch. It's hard to decide if it's too much or it's like a tearing or if it's a pulling. So you want to get a feel of lengthening indeed through the cycle of the side of the leg. Feels like it's getting high up in your back, but it's too much. The leg can tolerate it. Up to each person. So as we come out, we're going to take our sand and then bring your knees pointing up. Just a moment, but keep it going over to the other side. Try to keep in slow-mo, siesta mode. Okay, so my sand to the outer right leg now. It could feel pretty identical the first side. You never know. If you set this up, it might work out for that balance. And sometimes it feels like it's not quite the same, but you know you're in the right direction because you put your props in the right spots. But it could feel like wild and different, like you're not sure why it doesn't feel quite the same. So work with the breathing at the rib level. Maybe your head turns to the right, kind of gently. Hands could be out. Cactus might be a little much pressure up into your neck. So you might let the hands both be open or arms open. Maybe a tiny bit downward so they're not any higher than your heart. Some people might like to move the right arm back because of the stretch into the right side waist. Personalize your practice. Customize it. Feel at the level of ribs. Inhale. And exhale. Okay, so a few more moments. If the leg is getting tugged and you feel like you want to try to go a little more with the intensity, you can move the sand towards the knee. Or you could go opposite, sand closer to the hip and go with that weight bearing of the sand itself, because that's the weight. So just that traction does do some of that. But you want to find resistance with things to strengthen the bones, right? So for the bone density, it's not just like the weight itself, it's that feeling of resistance with the muscles, right? That basically rebuilds it, the bone. So you want to feel that. So that's part of this practice, is feeling that resistance. It's considered a stretch to you maybe, but your body is probably equating it with, hey, this is resistance. Let's go back to just laying around, you know. So that's what we're working with right now. Little bits of resistance. Now the legs are kind of in this touching together position. This is not an always hip one I do. We're going to do the one that you're used to today as well, but just kind of notice how it gets the back muscles directionally to stretch deeper, okay? It's a different depth, isn't it? So we'll find out when we compare, but let's take our sand away, I think. Okay, knees go back in center. Okay, I got it together here. All right, so when we come back in, we're gonna bring our hands to the bolster. You might end up keeping your blanket for this next of the series. You might slide it a little bit back, so it's just middle brain blanket. At the occipital lobe area, right, that ridge, or you might keep it. You decide. Knees to chest, and then push the bolster away from underneath you. And once your back is lining up nicely, I would keep the tucked position, the tucked in with the knees towards the chest, to really lengthen entirely in your back. Just kind of get that one for a moment. Pull the knees in without too much grasping on. Okay, and then we're going to take our blocks. You can find them hopefully nearby where your bolster was. And then as the feet come down to the bolster, we're going to move our knees out and place the blocks under the kind of the mid under our side of the leg. So you know the area you just brought your knees over side to side. Sand on that area. That's where the block goes, pretty much. I suppose some of you probably had sand near your knee, so maybe that's not exactly right. And the block height, you know, if you go too low and you can't feel like they're holding you, and that's not a sufficient support. And we want to be careful for this anterior sacral ligament here in the front anterior. And we don't want to overstretch this, right? So that's why I like to use something under the legs. Unless your knees go down, you don't feel like it's pulling, or your back doesn't arch more. You just have that momentum. No sand. Okay. So let's take the hands together, interlacing at the roots, get the hands in conversation, and turn the palms up so you're turning the hand inside out. hold that for a bit. Just hold that position, hands inside out. If your legs need to relax a bit, let's say your feet slide down with a bolster, right? And they maybe go a little bit towards the other side of it. That's okay, but you are trying to keep the feet together at some level of togetherness. They don't have to be completely zipped together, right, at the big toe, but generally they're together. Now the arms are going to go leaning back a little bit. So you want to get an angle of the arms moving back. If the elbows start to bend, right, they can't stay straight on one side or the other, or if it's just not working in tandem, you're going to work with when does it stay in tandem, back, and then stop at that point before one starts to bend more than the other. Just stop where there's balance. Breathing. Okay, cross the right arm over the chest, upper chest, left hand to right elbow, or just above the elbow, and stretch the deltoid on that right side. Now switch the arm, that's up and across, left hand across, right hand to left elbow, that works, same kind of thing. And then when you cross over, maybe relax the left hand. Yeah, one deltoid might feel entirely different than the other as far as its dynamic. So give it equal opportunity. So it's a basic aligned position for your back. And then take both of those arms together at the hands, interlaced, stretched back with bent elbows. Now bring the knees to point up, and we'll take one flow of the bridge, this variation. But when the arms are back overhead, maybe separate your hands. So this is one where we have no blanket on your neck. That's one reason I have a blanket necklace, was setting up for other things in the beginning. So you can remove your blanket anytime or keep it just underneath the brain. But when you find your first arch with your arms back, you'll feel the upper spine, and then push into your feet. Now, careful when you scoop the tailbone, and feel where it's almost like not the fullest scoop you can make, but you're lifting it off the floor. That middle space. And then lift up your hips. And so finding where it's interesting for you. And this is a moment where I want you to have kind of take an inner lens on what's going on with how high you lift in your back, how high you massage into the back. So we can compare, contrast and compare pretty soon. So feel that my knees are a little bit pointed out. I'm working more with that nowadays than I used to. Part of it's for my knee, but part of it's also for the health of my back plane, right? So it was very, very often that you would have to keep your legs closer and closer. But that's obviously causing some issues, traction issues for knees. So give it a little space. You don't want to swing them out like you had a moment ago with your feet together, knees out. But you certainly want to feel the complete awareness of the glute muscles. So then bring your arms forwards and down goes the spine. It's just a test of sensation. And then when you come back through center, what we're going to do is place the bolster, push it over towards the right side of your mat, kind of scoot it. I know there's a blanket down there too, so we're going to walk down the thing. Not totally sure. Now, step the feet down towards the blanket. If your blanket's under your feet, though, I don't want it under your feet for this bridge pose, so you might have to scoot it a little bit downwards if it's there. So feet are on firm floor. Okay, so now we're going to take the bridge pose without the bolster, any height under your feet, but I want you to have your feet far enough down that when you lift up, you really have to use your glute muscles. So if I have my feet closer in, I'm able to recruit other parts to make it easier to get the hips up. But if my feet are farther down, it's like, oh, it's a little different tensing in the bones. So I want you to feel them a little farther down than you're used to. Clearly, it's much easier on the knee. But when you lift up your hips, you're going to keep lifting, and your legs are not straight, but they're certainly not in a poked, bent up position. So keep those hips lifting, and then find a block. I'm going to have you go low on this one just for sanity for your hamstrings. You don't want to overly work those hamstrings, but it's a good strengthener for them. You're going to lift up inside the flat block under the back of your pelvis like you just had. But I want you to try to hover a little bit with your muscle energy, and then let your back, your buttock back, your back buttock rest, your tailbone area rest on the block, and then stretch your legs straight down. You got a blanket maybe, I hope you do. If you don't, it'll still be a decent amount of length. If you got the blanket, it's nice because you kind of step your feet out. You really wish you had that blanket perfectly set. You can roll to the side and get it set up. But you feel those hip points releasing. Might be better than when you started today with bolstering your back for this position. You might go, well, this is an improvement in this opening, probably because you did stuff in between. So give that a few moments and recognize the bone structure and the feet turning out. It's going to be a reality in this one for more than others. No, more than other strengths, but okay. Now the glutes kind of rolled in, right? They don't necessarily stay toned. Okay, so when we slide our feet back in, knees point up, it was a moment. Okay, I want you to feel your feet parallel. You might have to lift them up and notice you parallel and then go back down. As far as you knew, they didn't change too much. And then as you lift up your hips this time I want you to remove the block, find that belt. Maybe that was too many cues. Lower your spine if it's too much to get everything set up here. But if you can keep your hips up, keep them up. And then slide the belt so it's below your buttocks. It's not holding them up, but it's on the floor. And you're going to hold the belt with your palms open. Okay, so what you have is your hips are up, hands are holding the belt. My belt is in a loop, so it's a double hold, right? It's a little bit thicker. And then as my hands hold on, I'm going to try to get my shoulders back and back and back and back and lift my hips up. This has been a lot of glute time. The hip opener will feel extra spectacular because of this. Okay. Now, as you lift up your heels, just a little hip lift, heel lift, lower the spine. Try to hold that belt, palms towards the ceiling. Pull the belt apart, really hold it. And then once you get your hips all the way towards the base, you'll probably touch down with the belt, assuming. It could spring you back up. And then relax the rear. Okay, take a moment to relax your grip on the belt and let your knees windshield wiper side to side. You've got a bolster on one side, so that might change the balance, but it's there for a specific reason. So leave it on the right side, even if it holds the leg up a little higher than the crossover. So my feet are a little wider than hips distance, and my knees are swinging side to side with my feet down. Okay, now let's stretch the right leg. Actually, move your belt away from underneath you. Let the right leg release down. You can either keep the blanket or you can move it away, kick it aside. That's fine too. And then cross the left leg to the bolster. Make sure you got it over there. So what likely will happen with your right leg is it'll bend. And you might bend that right leg enough that you get a better stretch across your back, all the way into your mid to upper back this way. Both knees are bending. Okay? So add a ball, if you have one, to your sacrum. I don't think the block is exactly the same, but you could try that too. Just be careful you're not poking your sacrum. It doesn't feel uncomfortable. Add the sand if you like to the outer left leg. We'll add sensation, not requirement. If you're feeling comfortable here, with or without sand on the outer left leg. So if it slides up to that leg, then it kind of layers in. It's kind of an automatic response, I suppose, for me to use that sand on this one. But at this point, it feels like it's helpful for my lower back. I think your ribs and upper back is where the work kind of lies on this one at some point after doing this for a while. So purposely get your head to turn left, just the right amount, with the left arm open, and then feeling that counter spin in this chest, armpit chest. Your arm can go lower, and it can go up. Of course, it's got a couple directions on it. You can even flap in if you feel like it, but you want to find where the it's counter spinning, right? So it would be the overemphasis would be on turning my palm open and back. But try to get that arm to lay down on its back surface. If your hand gets tingly, you've done too much, right? So if you notice you've gone numb, then that was too much. So you want to bring your arm down if it starts to tingle. Even if it's like a real subtle tingle. So feeling that twist, the intercostals in motion. Costal motion areas, intercostals in motion. Always relaxed. Breathe inside. This was the pose that we did a little while ago, a couple poses back, where we have the knees side to side, both of them together towards the block. So this is a little more of an expansiveness through the skeleton, right? It spreads the energy a little farther out. And it's not so isolated in one spot. So your work when you actually also kind of take down one side is, go in increments of movement. So it's not a shock to the system, even structural balance. So I also like to kind of take turn your inner lens into the directional angle of the left hip over towards the leg parts to the right, over to the right side. And so when you look sand, that's an easy change. And the ball might not be such a big deal for you to switch through. It was a real anchor though. It's a nice little holding, encouraging support. So when you come through, I want you to take reclining pigeon or figure 4 pose, but really isolate this left back lower quadrant that goes from your QL, this quadratus lumborum area. That's the name of that lower side that connects your ribs to your pelvis. So you might hold that, and then when you bring your knees together and you roll onto your back, you're going to slide the left foot to the right knee, and then that left knee is open. And this is where that there's still like this little space there that's open because the knee is out. So when I move my feet off, my right foot off the floor and squeeze it a little in, you might rock a little side to side. This is a good one to take some time to figure out how you blend into it. Maybe you hold the back of your right leg. Maybe that's like no good for you to do. It's best to have the foot on the floor and the left knee open. To me, that feels best right now. Okay, you know, we've all played this game before pulling the leg in, but there's nothing wrong with using maybe a block on that inner. You might lose your ball, but you know, on that inner left leg and press it away. Can benefit for that hip flexor. As long as your knee is okay and you feel the ankle is not having too much stretch, just give it a feel. It doesn't have to be long, but maybe palpate that inner leg with the block. You gotta use the block because it's got those firm corners, right? It's a little more disciplined of the pressure points. It's pokey, like the ball might be very pokey. And then when you switch the whole experience to the other crossover, you're going to bring your knees to each other, right? And how would they go together? They'd probably have your feet apart, your knees would rest together in teepee pose. It's constructive rest. You've probably heard of constructive rest before. So it could be feet out, knees together. It could be legs resting on some height. That's also constructive rest. So as we come to the other side, what do we need? We need a bolster, and a sandbag, and a ball. So find that ball. And if you aren't using one, no big deal. You could actually get that blanket from the base and probably push it in towards the sacrum if you want, or just go without it. So this is another way to go into it. You can kind of roll into it. So be far enough away from the bolster on that right side and move over to the right side of your mat. Move your blanket if you're using that. And then you can bend both knees and then kind of roll into a twist. Yeah, intercostals in motion. Yeah, what intercostals do we need to get more motion? You didn't come here for technical class like that, but it's the upper intercostals, right? That we're trying to get more motion because of the neck. So it's my latest plan is to work on those. Love to be with less neck issues. Be a nice thing. So it's a little more of a project, those upper rib cages, but it's a worthy exploration because if it works, that'd be nice. Something you could do on your own. So you have that sand on the outer leg, perhaps. You got a ball, possibly at your sacrum. It doesn't have to be perfectly at a structural sacrum, but it's wedged in to give you kind of a rebound there. And then your right arm opens and maybe your head turns to the right. Okay. Feel where the weight is on the bolster. It's like if you close your eyes and you identify with this right leg, it's part of you, so you probably can feel it. But likely, I mean, you feel it internally, the sensations that are around the leg to get over there. But can you actually get that leg to kind of relax into the bolster? If you're gripping and you have like this inner shakiness, that means the bolster's too low. So you might put a blanket on top of it. Block might be too much, but the blanket is smushable. So feel where the arm organizes openness. We're getting a nice full body kind of rinse today, right? It's slow, cooling, but you know, it is pretty intense with the twist. So take the breath in, feel it move, and then let it go. If any changes, that feels like it's soothing. Maybe you slide the leg a little downwards versus pulling it up. Might be more intense. It's not going to be absolutely easier. Something's pushing into your leg, not just the sand, but it feels like it's too much. Just remove the sand. Arms could both be open, or it could be just the right arm. Turning your head and breathing. Cycle the breath. Do a 4 count in breath. And a 5 count out breath. So I'm going to give you your own timing when you get into that figure 4 pose, but knowing that that's coming to the next shape on the back would be useful for you to kind of plug into this rib expansion. Right? You don't want to lose that. I know we lose it when we sit and round our back, but we can achieve it right now to kind of celebrate that perspective in your ribs. And it might make you sleepy doing this shape. This can be a really calming position after deep, slow breaths. So if you're going to stay resting, you don't want to move, that's okay. So we move, those that want to move, we're going to move the ball, if you have that, and then the sand, if you're using. Then the sand isn't going to be useful for this next shape. So I just work on how did I get into it. And then, you know, getting back out, the bottom leg needs to bend quite a bit. So you can scoop in that right leg. And I know this seems like ultra careful, but it's nice to serve your back well, right? It's you're the one who's going to do that. No one else is going to do that. So find a way to move into your structure, to be careful and caring. And then when that leg is drawing in, you don't need your bolster now for a little bit. So you can move it anywhere you want. Okay, so that right foot is hooked to the left knee. And then when I hold on either to the back of the left leg, or I stay with the foot on the floor, which I seem to like very much. Mostly because these hip features, you know, can get kind of stuck. So if I put that block in, now if you want to use the block so it's the high setting as far as the size goes, you can maybe get that to work better than if it was flat. But I can see a reason for it to be flat because you can get more surface space with the block. Right? So kind of look pretty good. So palpate, or you can take it to that reclining pigeon. I'm not going to do full pigeon today, so this might be something you would like to do. So personalize. And then when you experiment with that lower back loosening, do a few more moments. This is important because I know that we're going to come up to all fours in a moment. So I want you to get a feel that the spine is lengthening right now. So much, right, that the floor is supporting that purposeful arrangement of the back muscles, just letting it kind of be lengthening out. And then you have to do the work of moving it with your breath when you get upright. Okay. You're still with me. There's still some people there. Okay. So if your foot is up, then you got to put it back down because that's what feet do. They just go back down to the floor. But I guess in our sequences, we don't do a lot of whatever's normal in your daily habit, right? We're kind of doing opposites to help you rebound and help the circulation from its gravitational pull. So when you do move yourself out and to get to all fours, I don't think I've got the exact method down still. Every time I see methods of this, I still haven't found the exact one that works for me. So when you uncross, you can roll up to sitting if you want. You can kind of roll to the side. It seems like the response that you learned from being a little one, that's what you would do is roll. And then when you come up to that, there's always these knee patterns that you're trying to find. How do you wobble around with your knees under you? So if the blanket feels okay with a quarter fold under your knees, take the quarter fold. If you decide you want the blanket to be a bit flat and more surface underneath your body, then take it so it's a little bit farther out. So these both work for today's event. So you can do either. I like a little more height under my shins, right? So it pulls my knees up from my pelvis. So I can see a reason for both of them. It depends on how you're feeling. So let's have our blanket. Let's see how I'll even have. Actually, you want a clear space, so just let it be clear. So bring the knees open. Okay, so you're on kind of this wide stance. And you're going to walk your hands over to the top left side. So just kind of reach in this side child pose. So the hands go to the top left side. My hips reach back to the right lower quadrant. And my hips are up. They're not trying to sink to my feet. In fact, it's a bit of a muscle pose in the arms right now. Okay. So when I want you to come back to center, actually put your elbows down. And so you're in Sphinx pose, but it's not full Sphinx because you're not laying on your belly. So you have your elbows down and you're going to round your back, chin towards chest. And then it's a little arch, right? It's not it's an upper back arch. And then round your back so that upper back is rounded, chin towards chest. Okay, start to sneak your arms over to the right. So your head comes up a little bit, but you reach to the right side and your arms, you might have to move things around so you feel like you're balancing both sides. So this upper outer left side of your upper body, your lower limb was just doing all this work. Now we're just getting into the uppers. Okay, so you're leaning back with the left side waist, not just your hips, but consider your intercostals in motion, this upper intercostal band. There's so many, ribs. I mean, you got 24, so that's a heap of ribs. It's a rib heap. Let your head relax. Okay. Skedaddle back to the center and really get a full hands turning out. So instead of my hands like forward going, I turn them out. And they consider this more seal with the hands. But feel how the knees separated in a wider, position than if they're tucked in when you come forward. It doesn't have to be confusingly wide, but this will be a little easier on your back stream. So you're going to lengthen through the front to what seems like an up dog. And then you'll come back just to table. Okay, so inhale and exhale. And then inhale forward. 2, lifting the heart. We'll call this one seal. And exhale back. And this time down dog. Fingers forward, index finger forward, and lift up. If you're slippy slidey, walk your feet a little closer. Maybe bring your hands so that they're certainly on your mat space. And extend through the back body. How can you do that? Right? It's a real trick, I think, because most of us do a lot of forward motions during the day, so we kind of override with the chest in the front. So when you're reaching with your hands, I want you to start to let your sitting bones have a sense of moving back, not necessarily up, but back. And then walk your hands, and maybe your feet have to help out walking forward to get yourself to a soft forward bend, standing forward fold. Knees bend, so it kind of holds your waist like child's pose. This is a standing child's pose. So I'm trying to get my body, upper body parts towards my lower, just my belly parts. That's what I'm trying to connect. You might hug the legs so that you're in more of a child's pose. Head ahead. You might want to let your hands hold your elbows for this version, which is perfectly adaptable for traction in the shoulders. So let the spine dangle and explore that movement of breath. In the back, upper ribs. Now, here we are back to those upper rib cages, which this might feel real easy for you to engage in when you're upside down in a forward fold. When you're on your back with your legs lifting, that's a little more kind of alien way to be with it because you stand more in this direction than that other direction. So just feel when it works well and change the crossing of the arms if you're arm crossing. With the weight of your head lowered down. And truly let that lower. You might still feel your jaw pull a little forward. So you want to park it so the crown of the head is towards the floor. Let go. And release. So final sweep here we're going through. We're getting all these ribs things going on. This is fun. So walk on forward. I hope you're having a good time with your rib cage. Walk on forward with your hands. And this is a rib strengthening position. You can tell the lungs have to really become fully engaged in holding that strength. So strengthening organs, I think, is just as important, right? As all muscles and flexibility is part of the topics. But now when I bring my feet a little back and then I lower my knees down, I'm going to try to find my way towards side save. So what I want you to do is take the blanket that's probably been kicked away and make a little bit of a quarter fold with that. We're going to do classic. So we're not going to use our block on this one. We'll just do how it feels the best. You get your other blanket and toss it to the other one so they're stacked, and then get your bolster across and tilt your right hip down. Now that's been a lot of upside downness very recent, so it might take you a moment, but I encourage you to try to get into it so that you are kind of sweeping through these intercostals now. So when you get a ball on the inside of the left knee, or now you can use a block or a ball, and maybe a block goes over the other side of the blankets, okay? And I suppose you could be any direction in that. If you work towards the back, it's all fine. But when we lean down, you can use a sandbag on the side or pass on sand. You can let that pass this pose if you don't want to use it. And maybe you always put it on your ribs, and maybe you put it on your hip this time, or your ribs. Okay. And I can see a sensation for both that would be positive. But the key here might be how your neck is supported. So mine is a little low. My head is dropping low in the pose, but I think I'm going to be able to rebound and pull to the back of it and feel best. So you could take your blanket and make it a little higher for your head too. But keeping the neck in this circulation dynamic is also pretty healthy. We're not doing things like full shoulder stands or anything, or plow on classes, but still there's some parts of those patterns that is healthy for a neck. We just are going to put impact into our skeletal frame that way. But so that means if I move my head a little downwards and it's slightly challenging, I'm going to try to adapt so I can get my neck in that different angle than its daily habit, which is fixed and directionally, pivots and doesn't really lean down. So take the time to feel. If you don't like the less blanket idea, then add one. Just an idea. But that weaves through the waistline. I can see a sensible setup of moving the left leg a little farther back. You just have to tactically use your opposite foot to help that ball get pushed over. So you can get kind of tricky with using both of your leg parts to help out. So feature releasing, breathing, elongating, and letting. Holding space for a practice, so that's likely going to be something you fuss a little bit in your pose. So you want to find where you can be in the shape. Pose itself kind of help you get into your body versus your body like get into the pose. There's circulation experiences. If your prime feeling is in your hip or your leg or knee, or those are areas of your prime feeling, then you likely need to soften that work with the leg, right, before you get out. Not make that a part of the intensity, and then work on this rib structure, because that's the bolster piece. Even though we might not spend energy on getting flexible in our rib cage, it's of a huge benefit to the lungs and the heart. It really is. So keep the energy to focus on it if you might find help with it. Features. Now, between the sides, what I want us to work with for a moment here is turning, opening, and then possibly move your sand. And maybe if your legs are in that kind of angle, you might need to move your ball. But you're going to actually try to roll on your back. Now, this could be really tricky. So you're going to have to get your elbows to jab onto the bolster and help you out. And your head has been turned in all these directions. So I walk the feet in very close. The ball is really nice for this if you have it under your sacrum. So then your arch is pretty mild. But you could use a block just as well. That way I don't have such a tense arch in my back, but my ribs kind of get a little flare. So you want to feel that separation. This is just a moment of structural balance. So the front is going to open, the back is going to probably pull in, because that's just what it does in the front. It's just a basic structural thing. So I'm using my bolster to kind of keep those wings of the kidneys open, so it doesn't feel like everything's just suctioning and tightening and dehydrating. It's kind of what that would be, right? Losing its hydration and mobility. Give it a few seconds more, not much longer. And then you get that balance, and then you're going to roll to the left side, and then take that side sage so the ball is on the inside of the right leg, maybe a block, and then left arm down, right arm over, maybe different side sensations in the neck already. Get a feel of this. So there's two opposing reaches from the hip. Really, it's more the starter of the leg, the hip. It's not even the sole of the leg, it's the hip reaching down. And from the ribs to the shoulder, but it could be your chest you work with more here than your shoulder itself. So if you have a little bit of a handicap in the shoulder, I would emphasize, even if your arm doesn't go up and over for the moment, right, that maybe you have it centered somewhere that's relatively sane for the shoulder, and then focus on the back and the ribs. This feels pretty good, so I don't have to push it back. I could if I wanted. Maybe you like to feel the circulation event, which is wonderful to do. But elongate, especially these little gates in the body, right? Hips, chest, shoulders. So the spinal right now, we're looking at the final patterns. Let the waist take advantage of the weight into the left hip. And the right leg sweeps back to what's comfortable for you. So again, you might have to use your foot to that ball to adjust if you move the leg further back. Part of it's the flexibility of your rib cage that allows your leg to move back, right? So this is something to be aware of for those of us that have like the front of the upper thigh, the hip hinge, the thigh lid where you rips up deeper back into there. So focus on the ribs, not just the lowers that you feel most of the time, but up high. That's why the arm reaching can be useful. I haven't really done any forward bends today, except for standing forward bend, which was inversion. So that's a little different, but nothing that's fully pushing ourselves for a long time in that direction. More the ribs. Breathe the muscles. Now the arm is going to need to go down, the right arm at some point. And then when you let the body weight move to the left leg. So feel the right leg hug in if you haven't already. Okay, and then this whole hip boundary, we're going to roll to our left side, shift up, and I want you to get your block, if there's one behind you, towards your knees, and then turn your bolster up on top of the blankets. So it points up, so now when you roll to your back on your bolster, not quite getting this, you have your bolster spine-wise. So we've got our blocks now under the knees. Okay, we've got our belt, and it's maybe still in a loop. So I want you to take your belt overhead, around your back, well, actually around your hips, the back of your hips, and then scoop up your feet. So we're in Baddha Konasana. I think we've been here before. Not today. Well, we were on the back, but not exactly like this. So we got our belt, so it's around. I've got my bolster for certain underneath my spine. You can have your sand across your feet. That would be a little more calming, probably, than your rib cage right now. And then scoop up the belt so that you really do feel like it's on the very upper buttock zone. It's not, you're not sitting on it though. That's not the goal, is to sit on your belt. So when you lower back, you don't have as much difference with your blankets now, right? It's not quite the same. So adjust away your props until you feel, oh, my spine is supported. And it's not quite exactly like the movement of your spine, but it's stiff. But it's, the bolster is a little more rigid than our spine. So I think it's kind of an interesting celebration to be back on the bolster, spine-wise. Sometimes I might visualize my spine as kind of like a bolster, right? It doesn't have much mobility, but you realize how much it does have with the rib cage. Intercostals. So the arms really pass down by the sides. Let the fingers relax. If they don't feel comfortable and awkward, even if you're by yourself, you know, sometimes the fingers don't feel good like this. So some like to have their palms down. But the arms a little farther out, feels easier on the fingers. And then reach into your lungs with your inhale, fill up, and let it go. As you alternate the in and out breath, feel what's touching the bolster. Even the weight of your legs on the blocks. Stay grounded. Shoulder blades going back a tiny amount towards the bolster. Slow down the inhalation. So the timing is 4 counts in and 5 counts out. few more moments to complete the practice. We're coming into that cycle of moving now with our spine in its slightly lifted position from when we started. Let your hands slide closer in towards the legs, and then feel where that buckle is. If it happens to be something you can unbuckle or kind of loosen it up, then that's not as much of a pressure on the legs. And then slide your feet in, point your knees up. And then as those knees are in that position upright, that's going to be an aimed position, an angle of your back. So kind of recognize the position of the knees. And our back's going to tilt that way too. Carefully move the blocks just down by your sides. And then be on awareness that when the knees tip over side to side, you're going to aim for maybe the direction you intend to go, that you're really comfortable to roll. And then roll your head too, and then come up. And you might find it's easy to get your bolster for a second to sit on it, maybe, or maybe no bolster. Okay, but find an alignment of your knees open and our kind of first seated position actually today, huh? Rarely get through. So with the spine in its arch, right? The knee has a different angle than that spine that I mentioned, but it still has some fundamental movement out of the ribs. Just check in with that awareness in your back landscape. Maybe you feel pretty secure in your core. That could be what you aspired for today. I don't know what we did. But let the hands rise up to the occasion in front of the heart.